Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground is brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund.
The history of Breezy Point is, our guests are very interested in it because it has a long and colorful history. And the resort's been here since the 20s, and it keeps evolving.
We were able, through a lot of different sources, particularly elderly folks that are still around this area who worked at the resort when they were kids, who gave us firsthand interviews and descriptions of how it was in those days. We have a lot more information than we've been able to print. A lot of personal stories of ladies who met their husbands while they worked in housekeeping and their husband was the busboy, things like that. Interesting stories, but we just run out of room to print.
There's so many stories that are interesting that it's kind of hard to separate fact from fiction. People were telling me about all the gangsters that used to hang out at Breezy Point. So I talked to one of Billy Fawcett's sons when I got to know Roscoe Fawcett. And I says, well, were there any gangsters ever up at Breezy? And he says, Father would never allow them in the front gate. So that put an end to that. And I think there was speculation because there were gangsters in the Brainerd Lakes area, but they weren't welcome at Breezy Point. Billy Fawcett started with Captain Billy's Whiz Bang, which was the risque book of its time, like the Playboy book of its time. And he built Fawcett Publications, which I believe was the biggest publishing house in the United States. He had 2 movie magazines, so he'd write up a movie star, and he'd expect them to come up and visit with his friends and stay at Breezy Point.
Captain Billy was born in 1883, and when he was 16, he lied about his age and joined the Army during the Spanish-American War and was sent to the Philippines. When he came back, he worked as a reporter for a couple of Minneapolis papers, and then he re-enlisted in World War I, and he became captain in the Army, and thus he got the nickname Captain Billy. When he returned, that's when he published Captain Billy's Whiz Bang, and he called it the Whiz Bang because whiz bang was the sound you heard. The whiz was a rocket mortar going over your head, and then of course bang when it hit. He made a lot of money with Whiz Bang, and then branched out to things like Popular Mechanics and whatnot over the years. But he made his initial fortune from Whiz Bang, and that's how he bankrolled building this resort. In 1921, Billy Fawcett bought the property that is now Breezy Point Resort, sight unseen, and made the trip up to do his first investigation on Valentine's Day, 1921. He came up in the middle of a blizzard and got here. The only thing here was a farmhouse and a couple other outbuildings, and looked around and stayed here for a few days and determined what he wanted to build and had an idea of what he was going to accomplish. And his real goal at the time was to provide a playground for all of his influential and celebrity friends. And it turned out that he was right on the money, because the resort evolved into kind of a haven for celebrities. They could come up here and nobody bothered them. Construction on the original lodge was between 1922 and 1924. He had Finnish carpenters who did all the log work using drift pins, no spikes, no nails. It was all old school construction. When that building was finished, he had the largest dining room, or advertised the largest dining room west of the Mississippi. He had all kinds of grand descriptions of the property, and people started to come.
This is the old Fawcett house. That was the living room in 1936. It's all log construction with a huge rock fireplace. The Fawcett house is rented out on a regular basis to a lot of family reunions, a lot of headquarters for a major group that we have in. It's got 11 bedrooms, 9 bathrooms, plus the living room and a kitchen. The only area that really is original is the Fawcett house, because it's a log building that we've kept as it was. All of the other buildings are new. The lodge apartments are new. This building that we're in right now, the Marina 2 restaurant, that was built 2 years ago. It replaced another marina restaurant that was built in '65. Our lodging accommodations are all new. White Birch Estates, they've all been built and we're still doing that today. There's some interesting stories on the gates. The person who built it is from the Lakes area, Charlie Scood. Charlie and his sons worked on that, and I talked to one of his sons who was helping at the time, carrying mud and rocks for him. Billy's wife came out and says, take it down. Billy's got a Stutz bear cot and he's gonna run into that front gate. So Charlie went into Pequot to the Thurlow's Hardware and got some dynamite, and he blew the part up that he had built. Here comes Billy. Billy says, who told you to do that? He says, well, your wife. He says, build it back. So there it is, we got our front gates. And here's the front gates today.
Captain Billy had a lot of famous guests, amongst them Sinclair Lewis, who, the story has it, would hold court in the bar here. He was staying at a cabin, a private cabin on the north end of Pelican Lake. He would also have parties at his place. And rumor had it that when he got tired of the party, when he thought it should be over, he would take out a handgun and fire a shot in the air, and it gave everybody a signal it was time to leave. He also had Betty Grable, Jackie Coogan, Myrna Loy, Rita Hayworth, Clark Gable, and President Truman. President Truman made a trip from Brainerd and played, at that time gambling was not legal, but it was rampant. And he played some games in Brainerd and won a few dollars, came up to Breezy Point and won a bunch of dollars, and was very happy with Breezy Point Resort. Jack Dempsey was amongst the guests, along with Gene Autry. Billy was what you'd call today a Renaissance man. He had his fingers in a lot of things, and one of his hobbies was big game hunting. He traveled all over the world and brought back trophies which lined the halls in the main lodge and in the Fawcett House. He was also captain of the 1924 U.S. Olympic trap shooting team.
Yeah, this is the old clubhouse. It was used for just about everything. There was a little grocery store in there. They sold sundries, drugs, ice cream, that type of thing. They also had gas pumps out in front of it at one time. And that evolved into what later became the Supper Club. It was added on to maybe 4 or 5 different times. A lot of different roof lines on the top of that building. Some of the big bands played here, the Benny Goodman playing and Tommy Dorsey, Count Basie Band.
The original Breezy Point Resort was actually called Breezy Point Lodge, and that was founded by Captain Billy Fawcett in 1921. Captain Billy operated until his death in 1941, at which point his sons took over, and they shut down actually during World War II due to gas rationing. The tourist business had evaporated. In 1946, they sold it to the Coca-Cola bottler in Brainerd by the name of Holmes. Holmes then had it for 1 year and sold it in 1947 to Jack Salinger. Jack Salinger had a silent partner by the name of Brownie Coate, who was the founder of Grandview Lodge in Nisswa. In 1962, Jenny Sims, a famous big band singer, and her husband Don Eastwold bought the property, and they had it until 1965. They made a lot of improvements here, but also ran out of money. And in 1965 they departed. It went into the hands of the bankruptcy court trustees from 1966 to 1967. In 1968, a group from the Hopkins House in Minneapolis bought it. In 1981, Bob Spizo, the present owner, acquired the resort, and it was renamed Breezy Point Resort, and Bob Spizo is owner today.
The golf course was started in 1921, right away. That was one of the first things that he did. I think the first tournament was held in 23. Walter Hagen, we've got pictures up at the traditional golf course clubhouse, playing an exhibition match with Captain Fawcett.
One of the myths surrounding Breezy Point Resort amongst the local folks is the presence of tunnels. The stories have it that there are tunnels all over. In fact, one story says there's a tunnel that connects the mainland to Gooseberry Island, and that it was a place for gangsters to run when the law came and avoid capture. Also, caves. Supposedly there are caves where possibly Al Capone stored booze. But to dispel the rumors, there were no tunnels, with the exception of one that ran from the main lodge into Captain Billy's residence, which is now the Fawcett House. And that was used before there was a kitchen in the Fawcett House for moving food from the lodge up to the Fawcett House. One thing to key on is the old resorts, the mom and pop, if you will, resorts, were strictly summer operation. In fact, the cabins weren't winterized. A lot of these resorts had central showers. They may have running water, but it was cold running water. They were primitive. And that's what vacationers expected. But as the motel industry grew, the Holiday Inns of the world came around, Mom all of a sudden realized, I don't have to live like that on my vacation. I can have a little luxury here. So a lot of the resorts responded. Those that didn't went away. So as those wants and desires from the customer changed, the resorts that changed along with them survived. The others didn't. And that, I think, going forward is continually recognizing what the customer wants, not telling them what they're going to get.
If you enjoyed this segment of Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground, consider making a contribution at lptv.org. If you have segment ideas pertaining to North Central Minnesota, contact us at legacy@lptv.org. Common Ground is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund by the vote of the people on November 4th, 2008.